Welcome to Rock That Relationship, a podcast about all things relationship with Corey and Tracy.
Now let's get real and start creating relationships that rock.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Rock That Relationship. We're so excited about this season. We are talking about breakups. And I know, Tracy, that makes you sad. It makes me sad. It makes a lot of people sad talking about breakups. But there are some really great things you can learn about yourself and learn about the kind of life that you want to lead and moving forward with just better understanding in the time of a breakup. And we're so excited today to have a guest on that Tracy's been gushing about for quite a while. I've had the opportunity to listen to several of her episodes, and I'm just not even going to steal your thunder, Tracy. You need to do this welcome because this is a big one for her.
Okay, thank you. Well, we're so happy to have Jessica DaSilva on, and she does a podcast called Let's Talk Attachments, and it has been so helpful to me, Jessica. So welcome to our podcast. I just want to tell you, you're a lifesaver. There's so many times when I needed to hear what you had to say, and if I didn't, I'd be an absolute mess. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with me. And thank you so much for giving me this platform to talk about this stuff and share what I practice most and think about most. So thanks for having me.
Well, it's so interesting. I actually was married for 8 years to a psychologist, and I would not absorb the lessons until after we got divorced. And it was in therapy afterwards. And finding your podcast that actually made me understand attachments, because I was so resistant to that before. So we can't wait to get into like how important those are, because I'm like this person that walks around the streets now. Don't you know about attachment theory? And don't you know what attachment stuff? And guess what? The great thing is you can work on it and it will get better. So we're totally excited. Can you tell us, like, how did you get into this? Like, what made you do this, getting on the podcast and everything?
Yeah. So I have always been fascinated with psychology because I didn't have the best role models growing up. So no one really to teach me good morals, good values. I mean, my parents are great people, but just lost in a lot of ways. So I had to kind of find these answers on my own, which is why I, studied psychology and then later studying marriage and family therapy. And it was, in my 20s, I went through a period of just very toxic, unhealthy relationships. And for me, I'm always like, I want to learn about this. Like, why am I doing this? Why am I repeating these patterns? And so that's why I went into the marriage and family therapy. And it was there where I learned about attachment theory. But it's interesting because I've talked to other like psychologists as well. And we didn't get a lot of training on attachment theory. So it was only after that I started to really like, wait a second, this stuff really resonates. Like it's making a lot of sense. And that's where I got into attachment work and specifically helping clients with their attachment styles and helping them understand how their partners are operating from their own attachment needs and traumas. And then I, started the podcast just to emphasize more on what I was sharing, because there's so much to talk about it. Like one post is not sufficient enough. So.
And do you think that like people, when you talk to them about that in your work, is that something they're even aware of before you bring it up? Or is this just, I feel like it's not really talked about, and I'm shocked to hear you say they didn't even talk about it that much in your training.
Yeah. Well, the people that come to me, usually they follow me on Instagram. So when they first find me on my the podcast, they're kind of searching for attachment theory, but on Instagram, they just see this stuff and they're like, whoa, this makes sense. Let me learn more. And then they learn more and then they come to me and they're just like, tell me everything. So, but a lot of people don't really know. No.
Well, and I just listened actually this morning on my way to work. I listened to your episode, I think August 16th of 2022 this year. Ren Russ, I think is her name. And it's just phenomenal. Like how much, if you start getting into this, it really helps you to understand not only your relationships that you currently have, like dating, but your whole life, right? Like everything that's led up to whatever, situation you're in now.
Yeah. And you know what? It's, we form relationships to everything, right? Attachment isn't just to our partner or our parents or it's whatever we have an emotional connection to. As we form an attachment. So it's everything in life. So once you start figuring out, wait a second, whoa, I'm anxiously attached to my partner. Wait a second, I'm like anxiously attached to my work,
pet, right? Or your pet. Exactly.
My pet. Yeah. So it's such an existential process when you really get into it.
Well, Jessica, it's so interesting. You talk about like kind of your interest in this, and I had never heard of this until the last maybe 9 or 10 months. And then of course, similar to Tracy, it was like, whoa, what is this? And so I think some of our listeners today, this will be the first time they've ever heard of it, other than the fact that we've mentioned it briefly in a couple previous episodes, but we really haven't gotten into the details. So can you maybe share a little bit about what are the different attachment styles and how they might show up in relationships with people, any kind of relationships, really?
Yeah. So there's 4 different attachment styles. And by the way, if you want to dive deeper into this, you can read about how this all came about. John Bowlby was a pioneer. But anyways, so there's 4 different attachment styles or 4 different ways that we experience love or relate to another. There's the anxious preoccupied. There's the dismissive avoidant, the fearful avoidant. Another name for fearful avoidant is disorganized. And then there's the secure attachment. Just wanted to preface and say that none of us are 100% secure, anxious, dismissive, or fearful. Yep. We all fall on a spectrum. So you're going to find that with different people, different aspects are going to surface, right? Different circumstances, just different phases, you're going to see these aspects surface. So with the anxious attachment style, in relationships, they fall hard. They attach quickly and they also fall really hard. Meaning, and it's really because they're able to form emotional connections much quicker. Right. So again, this is all about emotional connection and they're really good at that. So they tend to like, if I connect with you, I feel that attachment to you. Right. And I just feel it stronger. So anyways, but they have this underlying fear of abandonment. So you see a lot of these behaviors manifest or these fears manifest in relationships through how they behave, right? So like holding on, the latching on, the over dependency, the clinginess, the neediness, like don't leave me, which can cause a lot of problems in relationships. And then there's the dismissive avoidant. They didn't really get a lot of their emotional and or physical needs met growing up. So in relationships, they tend to be more distance, right? They tend to be very independent. They need a lot of space to self-soothe. They don't really allow a lot of emotional support. And that can also cause problems in relationship, especially if you have more of an anxious partner who wants to help, right?
Right.
Who wants to connect with you. And they also are afraid of vulnerability because being vulnerable means weakness. Being weakness means, well, I can't survive, right?
You'll be hurt and they won't survive it. Right. Or they think they won't. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So maybe in childhood, right, they tried to be emotional or tried to be vulnerable and it was just rejected. So emotions to them is, well, it's bad. It's weak. It's not good. So they carry that into their adult life, right? Which it's hard for them to connect relationships when you can't have that vulnerability with people. And then you have the fearful avoidance. So that was me for most of my life. You probably know that or have heard the podcast. Yes. Share about that a lot. And that is like, that is so we have both, anxious and avoidant tendencies. And usually with the fearful avoidant, it's you experienced either severe levels of trauma, right? Physical, emotional, mental, or you just didn't really trust your parents in a lot of ways. You just didn't trust them in a lot of ways. So we want love, but we think it's going to betray us. We think that people are going to take advantage of us. So it causes us to be very hot and cold in relationships. 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I always got a backup plan.
Yeah.
Right?
Because these things set in when somebody's younger, right? With the parents, I know there's been some terrible experiments they do with monkeys to show that, but like, or there's that experiment with the baby where the parents leave the room and they watch how the baby acts. Like, is it securely attached? Is it not? Is it anxious? Like, because parents aren't educated on how to be parents generally, right? I mean, and it creates these attachment styles in their kids.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. My mom had a fearful avoidant attachment style. My grandma had a fearful avoidant, my great grandma. So it gets these ways of experiencing love and relating and managing our anxieties. It gets passed down from generation to generation.
And then you said there's the disorganized, I think you have left to talk about. And then is secure its own, or are those people just too special to even like talk about?
So disorganized is the fearful avoidant. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's just another term. So there's the secure attachment. And again, nobody is 100% secure. Like, it's just, there's no perfect person out there. Right. And we're all going to have insecurities, it's just part of being human. So with the secure attachment, it's just basically how you cope, how you respond to relationship anxiety, how you respond to life anxiety. They just have healthier ways of sitting with their emotions, right? Processing their emotions, communicating their needs, asserting their boundaries. They're just skills, and it's skills that we can all learn. And that's essentially what I teach people, is just learning healthy skills of doing life. And
that's one thing that I love about what you teach and on your podcast, is that these things, while they are learned as children, they're not set in stone. And, your guest today was saying, like, her 76-year-old dad, like, this stuff set in when he was a kid, but yeah, it can, if you start to look at it, you can start to change it. And there are harmful. And do people with the different attachment styles show up differently, not only in relationship, but also in breakups? Like, do they show up differently in breakups?
Oh yeah.
Give us some examples of that.
So this is just from like clinical observation, and also listening to some podcasts with other, psychologists that practice in the realm of attachment theory. But, so with anxious attachments, remembering that they attach hard. So with breakups, they are still activated. They're still attached. They take a much longer time letting go. You'll find that they go into a lot of protest behaviors where it's like, no, you're the one. Maybe they're still calling, still texting, checking social media accounts. They just haven't accepted the fact that it's over, right? They'll fantasize about the person coming back and things like that.
Although people can sometimes come back, and it's not just a fantasy. But hopefully both people have worked on their attachment styles in the meantime, of course.
Of course. Are you speaking from personal experience?
I don't know. I can't.
From the headlines.
This is strictly clinical, as we say. Clinical examples.
Exactly. A generic.
Maybe you'll come on my podcast later to talk about
your Yes, I do want to.
So and sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't, right? So it's so important to set those limitations for yourself and those boundaries, as the anxious attachment. So dismissive avoidance, they take more of this detached approach in terms of, breakups. And it's not that they don't care. It's just, that is how they cope. They cope by emotionally detaching, and they're just good at it. Because they've been doing it forever.
I saw that up close. Yes, it is. I can't even talk about it. Yeah, it's hard. It seems very cold.
So, but if they're detaching, so let me ask you this, like, okay, if they're detaching, are they really detached, or are they just kind of compartmentalizing something that could come up later?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. They just compartmentalize.
Interesting. So 10 years down the road, they could be in another relationship and all this stuff spills out because it's been sort of pushed down. That's interesting.
Yeah. And that's exactly what happens. Because again, it isn't a healthy coping mechanism, right? It's not productive as adults. Maybe it worked when you were little, but as an adult, it's going to surface if you want meaningful relationships. And people can go throughout life just on that surface level. But if you want something meaningful and real and deep and rich, that's going to come up at some point.
Well, yeah. And isn't it that these are coping mechanisms that serve them to survive, including myself. I grew up in not a great environment, but it like wreaks havoc on you as an adult. Yeah. It helped you survive in a bad situation as a kid, but as an adult, it just wreaks havoc. Unhealthy, when you're trying to have healthy relationships.
Oh yeah, for sure. And that's why, you see most anxious and avoidant dynamics in therapy, because the anxious person wants to deeply connect and the avoidant is like, nope, nope, withdraws, ignores, dismisses, deflects. So yeah, at some point it's gonna come up, right?
Right.
Yeah. And then you'll see avoidance too. And, during breakups or after breakups, just very surface level relationships or like random hookups, that doesn't require emotional attention. So again, very surface level. And then there's the fearful avoidant. So fearful avoidance, it's a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag. One day it's like, oh my God, this person's my soulmate. I want them back. Next day it's like, fuck them. Pardon my language, but like, I don't care.
Yeah.
And it's just this back and forth.
And you were like that. I mean, I know you've done so much work, to correct or to bring you to a better place, but like when you were doing that, that's really how you felt, right? Like, oh, I love this person. Forget it. I love them. Forget it. Like, it's like a tussle inside of yourself, right?
Oh my God. It's awful. Like it's so painful, and it's painful to the person on the other end too, because they're like, what the hell is going on? So we really end up traumatizing the people we're with as well, with those ways of responding. But yeah, it's just this disorganized way of coping with your anxiety. It's a disorganized way of.
And what was there like a straw that broke the camel's back for you, where you're like, I can't do this anymore? I mean, our listeners can't see, you're relatively young. I mean, I'm, an over 50 woman, so you look quite young to me. Like, what was it? I mean, it's so great. Like, you have so many years ahead of you to live a more healthy, life. Like, what was it? Was it something that happened, or education you got, or what?
Yeah. So it was just that series of toxic relationships, but it got so toxic where it led to physical abuse, right? It was like the universe was like, Jessica, you're not learning your lessons. So I'm going to teach you in a really hard way so you can see what you're doing to yourself, like what you're tolerating. It got to the point where it got physical, and I just had this like out of body experience where I was just like, what am I doing with my life? Like, is this what I want? Like, is this, what is happening here? And that's where I started to make the change. Yeah. Cause I couldn't do that again.
Wow. What a wake up call. My gosh. So, as you talk about when you're, particularly I'm interested in the fearful avoidant one, when you're talking about that's like kind of the hot and cold and on and off, and I want you, I don't want you, thinking about too, when those people are moving on and maybe not holding on to their ex, but then grabbing onto a new person and maybe starting a new relationship quickly. And then are they hot and cold with them? And sort of, I'm fascinated by this sort of compartmentalization and the catching up of that later on, because I found myself in a relationship I was in for a long time. And then I was only apart from somebody for 4 months until I started dating somebody new. And it was great. I thought I was ready, blah, blah, blah. I moved on. And then when we broke up and I went through therapy, stuff from the old relationship came up. And because I had somehow compartmentalized it. So, I don't know that, 4 months is moving on quickly, but in my case, like I might have in a sense of trying to find some attachment, grabbed somebody and then, kind of hot and cold back and forth. Is my experience unique, or like, what is that? How does that sort of fit into the attachment theory stuff?
Yeah, no, that's actually really common. It's actually really common. And so what happens is that, to fill the void, to meet the need, we just tend to jump into these other situations, but not taking time to process. So a lot of this healing work really comes from learning from these experiences. So taking the time to learn from that relationship. What was this teaching me so that I don't repeat it in another relationship? Yeah.
Well, and to Corey's point about that, I mean, I've lived that life, right? And it's interesting for me, age, I don't know if age or if it's how much work I've done in the past, year and a half. So maybe it's just because I got to this age now where I said, okay, finally, I have to look at this stuff. And I noticed going forward, I'm not making the same choices I would have 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I'd have been like, oh, you broke up with me? Fine. Getting on to the next one. And, I don't want to do that anymore. I think it's similar, just, I don't want that. Like, I want to go forward in a securely attached relationship. Do you think, I guess there are some people who just grow up in good environments and so they have that, but is that something that we can learn to actually do you think?
Oh,
to be that person?
Yeah, 100,000%. Again, like your brain is changing every day. It is changing every single day. So if you, create an internal environment, an external environment of like growth and possibility and surrounding yourself and implementing these skills, eventually it's going to become you, right? It's going to become this new way of operating. So that's kind of what I did after that toxic relationship, because I would always jump from one relationship to another, but like same shit, right? And I took 2 years. I took 2 years off. Obviously, this doesn't have to apply to everybody, but because I really wanted to assess all of my relationships, identify the patterns, identify my reactions, which your attachment style will kind of tell you, how you respond and stuff. So that I cannot repeat these patterns, right? So I can actually find a compatible partner. And so much of that, especially with the fearful avoidant, is who am I? What are my needs? What do I need to feel safe and secure in a relationship? And then when you start to operate from this like place of empowerment, you start to see who is compatible with you and who isn't. Right. So I wasn't attracting these people anymore. I was attracting people that were actually responding to who I was and what I needed.
And do you feel like people, did you have to get the professional training? Because you're a licensed marriage and family therapist, right? But did you find research? Was this while you were in school, or had you already done the schooling and then you're like, oh, I'm not even doing this in my personal life? Or did you look and find the podcasts and the books? And because that's how I got started. It was, yes, the catalyst of being married to a psychologist, but then, oh my gosh, being in therapy, podcasts, books, like to keep me busy. Right. And then after this most recent breakup, like, oh my God, I need resources. I need help. I need to listen and fix, this. So this doesn't happen to me ever again.
Yeah.
So painful, right?
I know. And it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to happen again. You know what? To be totally honest, I didn't do a lot of therapy. I don't know why I didn't. I don't know why I didn't do a lot of therapy, but I was just reading. I did a lot of bibliotherapy. So just reading a lot of books, listening to podcasts. I did some seminars, on self-development. But honestly, the schooling is what helped so much, because I learned so much there, and also working with clients, because then it was a very surreal process where I could also kind of see how I was operating and learn from those experiences. So yeah, it was very much self-learned, I would say.
That's, as we talk about learning this is great, because, our listeners are going to say, what can I do to either you move a little bit more towards being, more securely attached, or at least mitigate the unproductivity of some of the things about the attachment style they have. So like for me, I know that, for the most part, I'm securely attached. I've done some of the assessments. I just know from my past, I'm pretty securely attached, but there's a couple things that just sort of trigger me, and I move to like anxious, and I literally see myself doing it. It usually happens.
I see her doing it too.
She does, because I call her and I'm like, what does this text mean? What is this text? This is, and I start spinning and spinning and spinning, and I get anxious about it. And so I've tried to find ways to sort of like, stop the cart, move back a little bit, go back to your secure place. And then I know there's other people who just aren't even just generally securely attached, but that, are trying to find ways to intervene. So, aside from like educating themselves about reading, are there things you can do kind of in the moment when, especially if someone who's aware of this is like, oh, I'm slipping into an unproductive behavior based on my attachment style. Like I'm getting too clingy, or I'm pulling away, or, what would you say to them to just kind of stop in the moment and recognize what they're doing and maybe take a different course?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So, first of all, I just wanted to mention with the anxious attachment, we are so self-conscious. Like we're always thinking about the other. And so much of it is like, wait a second, what do I need? Right? Let's come back to me. So yeah, there's this embodiment process, but, honestly, getting clear on who your secure self is. Who is your secure self? And there's a lot more to this, but whenever I am feeling activated, I will just kind of come back into my body and ask myself, okay, Jess, how does secure me want to respond to this? How does secure me want to respond to this? Is she anxious? Is she like too worried and too consumed about the other person? Or is she focused on herself? Right? Is she relaxed? So it takes some work, but it requires you to get really clear on who your secure self is, which, you can read books on what a secure attachment kind of looks like, how they identify, how they relate to themselves, how they cope. So, I teach this all in the program, but I can also send you guys some links as well if you want to share with your community. But yeah, getting clear on your secure self and then asking yourself when you're activated, what would secure me do in this situation? And in that embodiment process, when you do that over and over again, it becomes more habitual. I used to get activated all the time so quickly, just, text and all these things. I would overthink it. And now I'm like, Jess, I set a boundary there. I'm not doing that. Secure me does not do that. Let me refocus my attention on something else. But again, it takes.
Well, and you can have friends do that for you, right? So Corey and I have actually, that's how we got started on this podcast. We hike a lot together, and it would be this, what we call ruminating or what's speculating, and like, oh, what's happening? And then we make up all these stories, and I'm like, stop, we have to stop. Like, it's not helping, but this is what you're talking about. It's like stopping and reframing or bringing yourself back. But it is really hard to do it on your own. And I've just found throughout this process of living, friends are like gold, right? Like
everybody needs a Tracy to stop, stare at them right in the eyes and say, stop speculating. Sometimes it just takes that for me. I'm like, oh, you're absolutely right. I need to just stop for a second.
Right.
Yeah. Using your resources, like you guys are each other's resource. Finding what your support system is to kind of snap you out. I mean, psychology, they call that thought stopping, but it's really hard to do that when you're not used to doing it.
Right.
So if you can get help with someone to kind of distract you and bring you back into the moment, that's really, really helpful. But yeah, asking myself, what would secure me do? Right. And there's always a choice. There's always a choice.
That's so good. You should make up t-shirts, although you're more fashionable than we are. What would secure me do on the back? Follow me. What would secure me do?
I like that.
Yeah.
Well, this has been awesome. Can you tell our listeners how to find out about you? Like, I think everyone should listen to your podcast, whether they're going through a breakup, whether they're just wanting to be in a relationship. I mean, your podcast isn't specifically geared towards breakups anyway. It's about attachment style. And, if people are having troubles, look at the attachment style. Like, that's an avenue to go down, right? To explore. So how can they find you? Because everybody needs to know about you.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. So yeah, if you want to learn more about your attachment style, understand how you experience love, how other people are experiencing love, so you don't take as many things personally, you can check out my website, JessicaDaSilvaCoaching.com, my Instagram. I usually make a post almost every day. It's the Jessica DaSilva. And if you're interested in, a coaching program, a course to kind of guide you through this process and becoming more secure, that's also on my website. And if you want to discover your attachment style, that is also on my website.
Oh, great. And the podcasts are the best,
and the podcast.
Really. The podcast. And let's talk attachments, right? Like, I've sent that out to so many people. And I'm like, here, look, this will help you. Oh, hey, look, does this sound familiar? Is this what I'm going through? Listen, this will help. I mean, I wish they would teach attachment styles in grade school.
I know that would have been amazing. Or
right?
it still could have happened. So,
right. Well, and it's never too late. I mean, I'm a bit older than you, like I said, but it doesn't matter because I've got who knows how much more time to live. And I want that to be quality, right? I want to not live I don't want regrets anymore. And I used to be like you. I was the fearful avoidant. I was I love you. Wow, get away. And, slam the door and I leave. But then 10 minutes later, I'm like, hi, can I come back?
Yes.
And it drives people insane. And I have gone through a process with several of my exes to, talk about that and say, I'm so sorry about that. And it's really now morphed our relationships into even better. And those are people I was with for 8 and 5 years that they're very close relationships now. And I can own what I did. And it's because of the way I grew up. And I had no understanding of that, no understanding. And I just feel like Corey knows I say this all the time. Attachment theory is so critical. And when it was first explained to me, it gave me the creeps because I didn't grow up with that love and affection. And I thought it was creepy. And I was like, what? I wasn't attached to those people. What? Don't say that to me. But I was attached, but in a disorganized, unhealthy way.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's why it's so important because humans are wired for attachment. It's like we can't run away from this, you guys, right? We're wired for attachment. So we need to know, okay, how do I create secure attachments rather than insecure attachments? Because it's going to be one or the other. So might as well learn now. Right?
Exactly. And now can be anytime for anybody.
Yes.
And you truly are a lifesaver. And I recommend everybody to listen to you. And you have done so much for me. And I so appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I'm so happy to hear that.
Well, Jessica, it has been such an honor and pleasure to have you on. I've learned so much just in our time together today. And I love listening to your episodes, and I'll be keep continuing to tune in to hear your awesome insight, because as we talked about before, this isn't just about, romantic relationships, but all of the things that you're sharing are just about helping build and develop and foster better relationships with everyone. And so I think there's so much to be gained and learned. So I hope our listeners tune in. We'll put a bunch of great resources in the show notes. Thank you so much, everybody, for taking some time to listen. Thank you again, Jessica, for being here, and go out there and rock those relationships.
Yes. Woo. Thanks for having me.
If you liked what you heard, check out our show notes for resources from today's episode. Make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram under Rock That Relationship, and go to our website at rockthatrelationship.com for updated episodes and more great information.
Thanks for listening. Now go rock those relationships.